What has the world missed? What has the church missed in the death of Pope Francis?
Think like a lot of Africans who move with this idea of wanting a conservative. It's just all about hating the gays. I'm just like, do you hate gays more than you love yourself? It's so confusing.
The leaders you worried about who are incapable of responding to this situation are going to either collapse or be driven out. Even these Traores, they are going to be a temporary measure. They are going to be driven out because
I don't know why you believe that.
I
I
do.
wonder if it's my youth.
Welcome to this episode of Bad Natives Podcast. With me, Charles Onyango Obo, in Nairobi, the city in the sun, which is quite cold and wet.
Well, I'm at Deswa Giwasage, and it is also very, very wet in Lagos this morning.
And this is Robert Kausheng, the bad native from Kampala. It can't make up its mind whether to be wet or dry, so it's somewhere in between. The sun has taken a break, so it's a bit cloudy. But yesterday we had a really heavy downpour in Kampala, so I am expecting it to happen. We're in rainy season now, anyway, so that's what is to be expected.
And so it seems, uh, there are many things which are wet in Nigeria, and we're just looking at some data from Nigerian breweries, and it says
Mm.
that it recorded a 69% year-on-year rise in revenue in the first 3 months of the year. So
Mm.
People are wetting their
why
throats.
why are
They,
Nigerians drinking so much?
It's because they couldn't afford to drink at this time around last year or the year before. It's not the whole story because if anyone has forgotten, Emefiele, who was our Central Bank of Nigeria governor, put in a new cash policy right before the elections in 2023 as a way to curb vote buying, but really there was a lot going on. But people didn't have cash. Nigerians were lining up in front of ATMs to get cash, and people didn't have money. So at the start of the year, sometime in 2023 or end of 2022, people did not have access to cash at all, and people couldn't buy drinks. So that's
Ah,
part of the story.
out-
Part of
out.
the story is that it's a it looks nice if you don't know why people weren't buying it before. It's not true growth. It's not true.
it's
But people
called
are it's not
it's
true
called
growth. But yeah,
it's called excess capacity. So they were mopping up they were mopping up excess capacity, and guys were
they
catching
were
up on
mopping up.
lost
They
guys were
were,
and
catching
yeah.
up
and
on
in
lost
fact
time.
there are there are also a lot of wet faces this week after the death of Pope Francis
Mm.
on Easter Monday. It seems he was a very much loved Pope. There was this view, Bob, that he is the most friendly Pope to Africa. Although, I mean, I think he made 10 trips to 5 countries compared to Pope John Paul, who made 16. No, no. John Paul made 16 trips to 10 countries. Pope Francis made 10 to 5 countries. Now, I want to start with you, Bob, and this is something that Frero would have loved to speak on, but Frero is on the road. So we will catch up with her next week. But back to you, Bob. I remember in 2015, when the Pope did his Africa tour, you were very involved in Uganda in the organizing committee. I remember you shaking me down for some money to buy, rosaries. Uh, what 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 have we missed? What has the world missed? What has the church missed in the death of Pope Francis?
we've missed George or Jorge Bergoglio, the man, because I think it's Jorge Bergoglio, the man who came to the office of Pope, and the man in him made Pope Francis or the papacy really, really human. And for me, Charles, the story is intensely personal because he died exactly 10 years on the date, almost to the date, when I visited Assisi. Because I visited Assisi round about this time 10 years ago. And my hosts, for some strange reason, decided to take me to the burial place of St. Francis of Assisi. So I went there, and then I was taken to his small chapel in the square where St. Francis of Assisi, where there's the rose garden where he used to contemplate and pray. And when I came back, 1 week later, Charles, I kid you not, 1 week later, the Archbishop of Kampala, the late Cyprian Chizito, then asked me to lead a fundraising effort from the public for money to support the Pope's visit. So I made some connections. And by the way, this I've never spoken about publicly, but something of a miracle that happens in my personal life on the morning that Pope Francis leaves Kampala. That same morning. It was completely unbelievable. But that's a story for a different day. I'll probably write a book about it. But in that process, so there's one thing, Adesua, that I need to let you know. Uganda is the one country, if not in the world, certainly in Africa, that has the highest concentration of Catholic saints. We have,
Really?
yes, we have 22, actually no, now 24, I think, yeah, 24 Catholic saints. So there is a famous Uganda martyrs who were 22, and then the other two who were killed in northern Uganda. So I think it's about 24. So the most important reason the Pope came to Uganda was to commemorate the location where the martyrs or the young boys who were executed started their journey to martyrdom. And it currently has the most, I consider, apart from, so there's a bit of a competition, but it has the most beautiful cathedral that I've ever seen. And the money that, in Uganda, of course, not elsewhere, the money that I was involved in raising is what made it possible for the contractor to make the place ready for the Pope to come there and commemorate that location. It's now a minor basilica. It's absolutely beautiful. But I guess for me, that's when I got interested in Jorge Bergoglio, the man, and how he arrives at becoming Pope. There was a biography of his I read, and it's clear that he gets his political maturity in the Argentina of the 70s and 80s during military rule. And he was actually exiled at some point by his own church and went and lived in a rural area. And I believe that that's where he shapes his life as somebody who is pro vulnerable people. And by the time he becomes Archbishop of Buenos Aires and becomes a cardinal, at that point he is firmly clear that he is going to be a pastor, a religious leader for ordinary people, for the vulnerable. And so his whole conduct as Archbishop of Buenos Aires was a common man. He cooked his own meals, he traveled by public means, he was available and always visited the vulnerable areas of the city of Buenos Aires. So it's not surprising, therefore, that when he becomes Pope, his first public act was to visit the island of Lampedusa, where African migrants had been washed to the shore, and some of them had actually drowned to their deaths, trying to cross into Europe in search of a better life. His visits to Africa are very curious. First of all, for me, what was very interesting, the other countries I could understand, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, he went as a head of state mostly, and then he had that. But then he goes to Central African Republic at a time when Central African Republic had been torn apart by war, unending war, and people were dying. His other visit was to South Sudan, and then, of course, to the DR Congo. What's very interesting with South Sudan is that when the leaders are busy killing each other and destroying the country and wrecking the whole country, he then he first of all initiates a peace process that in part contributed to the peace deal of 2018 and so on. But then the most shocking act for the Sudanese leaders is he invites them to the Vatican. And as he's talking to them, out of the blue, he decides to kneel down and kiss their feet. It is very humbling to look at Salva Kiir's face as the Pope is kneeling before him. I,
The keys didn't seem to have shifted
no, but
the South Sudanese much, did it?
no, but both of you need to go back to that video and have a good look at it, because for the first time I saw Riek Machar's face. He was looking frightened and humble. Salva Kiir was confused. But you see, it had its effect. It didn't have a lasting effect, maybe, but it was a sobering moment for this southern. I swear your mic is off.
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself because there was music coming
Uh-huh.
from the environs as we're having this very serious conversation about the Pope.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
Yeah, no,
the
but but
continue.
the
You wanted to
but
say something.
but that's why, just if if you can keep it, because if we can take off what Bob is saying, the interesting thing is Pope Francis didn't come to he didn't visit West Africa, and West Africa is quite
Ah,
devout.
but,
I and
but,
But Pope John Paul did visit West Africa. He visited us when Abacha was in power, and was pleading for the release of Obasanjo and the other prisoners at that point in time. But it's for me. I was just thinking about when Bob was talking about how it's personal. My grandfather is also he was Catholic, and he also died over Easter. And I remember just thinking he chose to go that Easter. Like it was definitely a choice. He knew what's coming. He sorted everything out. He had conversations with people about how he wanted things to go when he was gone, and then he was like, "Oh, it's Easter. Like, bye, guys." So
check out.
yeah. So I thought it was definitely a special that the Pope decided to head out on Easter Monday. And also just the date and everything. But yes, the Pope didn't visit West Africa, but West Africa there are quite a lot of Catholics, including in Nigeria. My grandparents were Catholic, but Catholicism is, I would say, prevalent mostly in the southeast. But you do see it spread. But I think as everyone has said, it does feel emotional because of the type of man that he was and what he represented. For me, it's the calls that he made to the family parish in Gaza, and the fact that he stood with the people of Gaza so strongly, the fact that he spoke about love and mercy for all of God's people, regardless of how they identify. I think that these things matter, particularly in a world where we have such strong hate and stratification across political lines. For someone to live a life that's driven by love and mercy and care for the people who suffer the most and the most vulnerable, I think is incredibly important. Particularly also, his work with interfaith relationships and reaching across to those who are not of the Catholic faith. Um, but going forward, I do hope that whoever is the next pope also imbibes some of these qualities.
there is this talk that it's time for Africa to have a pope. I think it's been in a very long time. I don't know what, more than
For
2,500
no, it's 400 years.
years.
The
Uh,
last guy
they
was 490
they
something.
but but Bob, what are the chances of that happening? In fact, at the SWA, from West Africa, there is talk of Ghana, Cardinal Peter Turkson.
Mhm.
Uh, there is Cardinal Fridolin Ambogo Basungu from DRC. There is this uh, Robert Sarah. You know, he universalates and has very extreme views sometimes from Guinea, and to a lesser extent, Cardinal Antoine Kambanda. Bob and Ado, so I'll tell you, I've just written an article in which I don't think that there should be an African pop, but but let's start with you. What is your take? I mean, what happens from here? Do you think it's time for Africa to have to have a pop, and who do you think is favored?
For me, I don't care for an African pope if he doesn't imbibe certain qualities, like I have just said, of what Pope Francis gave us, leading with love and mercy and care and no extremist views. For me, I don't actually care for this representation in that type of way, because it matters more if those views Pope Francis meant a lot to me. I'll put it that way. So some of the Africans that are putting forward, particularly Cardinal from Ghana. I don't know if he. Yes, I'm not sure about that. I understand why people feel like it's representation matters in that way, but I don't think we're likely to see an African pope at this point in time. I think it's more likely to be an Italian pope, because we haven't had an Italian pope back to back. So I'm thinking is probably going to go back to Italy at this point in time. Um, but I mean, Bob might disagree. He might want an African, a black pope.
Eh, well, unless it's me. But no. But the one thing we forget is that it is called the Roman Catholic Church. So
Mhm.
it is essentially a a European uh, establishment with all the methods and cultures of worship that are clean. And one of the biggest battles, by the way, in that church has been was philosophically accepting uh, Afro-based methods of worship. Like it took a long time to accept African hymns or translations, African translation of European hymns, drums in the church, African design. So the the fact that that has been a philosophical battle for generations shows you that this question of admitting Africanness is still a battle. But for me, the thing here is this: I would rather, I think for me, what matters is because the Pope Francis, and the papacy, has such moral authority internationally, that you want a person who, I would prefer if they didn't give us a conservative, who will find ways of accommodating all these right wing characters that are emerging on the international scene and dismantling the world. Because we know that there have been times when religious leaders have sided with fascists. So it will not be anything new. So hopefully God can give us a pope who can play the fundamental role of being a moral leader, moral in a world where the only guys you have who are on the world stage are Trump and I don't know. We're being it's only the Canadians who might come to our rescue. So in a world like that, you need a voice akin to that of Pope Francis. Which takes me, Charles, because you asked this one important question. It's true that he didn't visit West Africa, but the most interesting thing is that the his three right hand men on Africa, were from West Africa. Apparently, Cardinal Robert Sarah was a very close confidant of his. Even Turkson of Ghana, Cardinal Turkson of Ghana, was also a very strong ally of his, as is the guy of Congo, Besunga. In fact, I overheard my friends in the Catholic establishment in Kampala saying that for appointment of cardinals, he relied a lot on Besunga as his voice on who in Africa should be a cardinal. But also, what was interesting is he also appointed the biggest number of African cardinals ever in the history of the church. The only disgruntlement I have is that he left us out. For all our worth, we've had only 2 cardinals. And so we are not even at the table represented in the election. We are on the periphery, Charles. We have been marginalized. Well, but I must put a disclaimer. I am not Catholic, so everything I say must be discounted by
I can't believe you're not Catholic. This is the most shocking part of this conversation for me today. What?
that. I am not Catholic. This is why.
What?
Yes, yes. And I have stood at the altar of the main cathedral in Uganda and spoken to the congregation. So I am one of the few.
But you
You
know,
have lived so many
um,
lives. It's so
look,
impressive.
one one of the
Yes.
things is that Pope Francis was liberal. He 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 accepted blessing gay marriages. He although he didn't go far enough on the question of having women in the priesthood. He accepted the idea of women being deacons, which rubbed the African church bishops and cardinals the wrong way.
Yeah.
And in fact, on the question of blessing gay marriages, Africa had to was was allowed to opt out. I have a lot of problem with that approach, to things. But really, is this so? So what happens next? I mean, apart, you both seem to suggest that we need to have someone who is still in the same tradition, liberal tradition.
Desua, what do you want?
I do want somebody in the liberal tradition. I also think, particularly when we have the rise of the right wing in Europe, the rise of fascism in Europe, in America, when you have these waves, I would not want somebody who is more likely to align with that side of the aisle in power because I am a black woman. This is self interest. I
Not
am a
not just not just a black woman. You're a black African. You know, once
I'm
you
a
must
black
add.
African woman. Like I can't, I don't even understand. And I think like a lot of Africans who move with this idea of wanting a conservative, it's just all about hating the gays. I'm just like, do you hate gays more than you love yourself? It's so confusing. A lot. I saw some people on the internet say, "Oh, he was the worst pope ever." I said, "Ever." Ever? Like, do you
They
do you know
obviously
what was like?
they all
It's
they
so
haven't read.
ahistorical.
Sorry, Desua, finish. I was just.
Oh, you were going to say they haven't read what?
They haven't read Michelangelo's biography by Walter Isaacson. Man, there were some really nasty guys who were Pope. Some very bad characters.
Very, very bad. I have an
And
episode of it on my other podcast.
by the way, some of them were even polygamous. So so this is the interesting thing that we somehow seem to think that African tradition uh, can only, because what's interesting is that I've seen arguments against the Pope by the clergy of the Catholic establishment in Africa, making the argument based on African culture and tradition, not even on religion, faith, or doctrine. So some of that is what is confusing. I think that a lot of it, by the way, is an attempt to protect territory. And I don't want to stray too much into that area, Charles, because it is one thing. It's one thing to condemn gay people, and then you've got these stories of abuse of boys. So what? How do people like that live with both situations? Is those contradictions is what I don't understand. They want to cover up that episode, but are claiming this is a bad thing. So all those things for me I find confusing. But the thing I want to go to, Charles, is let's not look at Pope Francis in the specific cases that he made. You look at him as a man who understood the marginalized and the people who are vulnerable in society. And that's where he took his stand. It just so happens that LGBTQ guys, as find themselves on the margin or they are on the margins. And so that was it. I think you'd rather look at his philosophy and say, we need a voice in the Vatican that can bring back poor people, vulnerable people, where Christ stood and defend them rather than be part of the establishment. By the way, apparently when he visits a country, he visits both as the Holy Father and as head of state. The element of head of state lasts not more than 30 minutes. So, for instance, when he came to Uganda, his arrival at State House in Entebbe and the speech and everything took no more than 30 minutes. The rest of the visit was as Holy Father of the Catholic people of the world. So you need a man like that, not someone who is interested in the trappings of state power and all of this stuff. And having said that, Charles, which neatly takes me to my next point, is when he was in Congo and he was giving the sermon, one of the things he spoke about was corruption, especially in DRC itself. And he spoke out strongly because remember that the Catholic Church had said that the first election of Tshisekedi was stolen. They stood with the... So he reinforced the position of the church. What is ironic is he goes at a time when Congo is sliding back into open civil war and people are being displaced. So I'll pass it on to you, Charles. What does the Congo do? Do they hope that they get the Pope, or do they hope that Kabila comes back, or how do the Congolese save themselves?
Well, I mean, you're right. I think I suspect there are very many people in Congo who want a Messiah, and the South Sudan and DRC were the last two countries in Africa which you visited in 2023.
Yeah,
But yes, it's very interesting. I mean, just a few days before he died, Kabila returns
yes,
to former President Joseph Kabila returns through Goma, and all of a sudden, we have a new twist in the Congo drama.
yeah.
The the
But where,
the
Charles, where did he, tell me, where did he pass? Did he fly directly to Goma or did he go through Rwanda? Or was it from Uganda? What?
no, because you can't land in Goma now. The airport
It's
is still
closed.
unusable. But the the way I see it is that it has shifted the dynamic, because the very fact that uh, Kabila is in Goma, which is the de facto headquarters of M23. I
Yeah,
think it has helped their whole plan, which we are now seeing, to expand into a broader movement beyond one, which is just against the a Tutsi, a Congolese Tutsi defense movement, because now
yeah,
they are talking of protectors of the Swahili. They have included the Hema of the Turi into their thing, and and this has really been a very, very good bonus for them. What we now don't know, and Bob, you can, you know, Kabila, he was close to the Ugandans. He grew up in Uganda and Tanzania, of course.
by the way,
Uh,
Adesua,
what what
Adesua,
and
Yes.
what do the people
sorry,
in
Charles,
Kampala
just a
read of them?
second. Just a second. I need to tell Adesua, that Kabila used to play in a band in Kampala.
The son.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, because also Ali Bongo. He used to play in a band as well.
This one
yeah.
was in Kampala. When he was in exile, so it's only when his father takes over as president, he sends him to China on a military training course, and then he comes back and starts his
So
music
he
career.
so he's just like his brother in West Africa, because it's when his father decided that he needed a successor, that he left music behind
Yeah,
to
to go
become
to.
a
Yeah.
mm,
So what happens, Charles? What I'm hearing now is that apparently Kabila has been consulting with, amongst other people, Kigali and Kampala on what role he can play. It also looks like both Kigali and Kampala are keen to project this as an Congolese national issue rather than a Banyamulenge local problem. So, what they are looking at, from what I'm hearing, is that they expect Kabila to champion a constitutional review process, an admission that Congo is too big to be governed by a weak state that is based 2,000 kilometers away from the theater of war and from where you have a lot of resources. So the new initiative, the new peace initiative, is looking at a discussion of or around devolution, where a recognition that regions can and should take interest in their own governance rather than from Kinshasa, and then work out what Kinshasa's role will be in terms of territorial integrity, sovereignty. Those are the kinds of things. So it looks like the leadership of Eastern and Southern Africa is beginning to lean in that direction. And so it looks like Kabila is the kind of leader who the guys in Kampala and Kigali think can champion that approach. Of course, the problem is that you've got the Kinshasa elite and the Lubumbashi elite who tend to manage a lot of the issues on that side, but also manage a lot of the foreign relations. And so when we've discussed later, we'll talk about how those people are now trying to engage with Trump in the hope that Trump can save them. But Trump seems to have other ideas about how to deal with Africa, and we'll come back to that. But so the lesson from that, and especially for you, Adesua, who is quite young, is that as there's the saying that in politics there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. Man, there was a time if Kabila had turned up in Kigali, he would have been shot dead. If Kabila had turned up in Kampala, he was enemy number one. So to see that he is now back in an alliance that is being driven by Kampala and Kigali just shows you how much has changed in the fortunes and politics of Congo. So it's one of those cases where, and hopefully you can have a real African solution, because I think they have
Yeah.
now, from what I'm hearing, by the way, because of the pressure from Qatar and the East African leaders, they've managed to pressurize the fighting groups not to go out beyond their area of control and not to
But
try and
also
go to
it's
Kisangani.
But
Go on.
Yes,
like
and
you said, there was something that I'm thinking about because there's also nothing new under the sun in this situation. The first time I had ever heard someone say the phrase is, if they explain, Congo to you and you understand, that means they didn't explain it well. It was a couple of years ago, right? And so particularly because even before, if we think about Kabila Senior, right, there was a rumors that his true killers were Rwanda. But also that was also part of his original support, as in Laurent Kabila, not Joseph, right? And so
Yeah.
these alliances have been shifting and changing for a very long time. But like I said, if they explain ZRC to you and you understand, that means the person didn't explain well. There's a lot of moving factors there. And if we say we want a real African solution, I'm not entirely sure what that looks like for the people of Congo, particularly in this era of
But
resource control fueling conflicts across the continent.
Adesuo, I have a question for you. So the guy who has been selected as the lead mediator in this process is for Nyasingbe, the president of Togo. What kind of person is he and what capabilities does he bring to the table? He's also president of a small country. Okay, he managed his dynastic succession quite well and has seemed to keep. But you tell us, I mean, isn't that a curious choice of someone to lead the mediation.
It is definitely a curious choice. I don't know a lot about him as a mediator. Recently there were reports coming out that he was mulling joining the Association of Sahel States. In fact, leaving
Whoa,
ECOWAS. Yes, it'd been reported online a couple of times, and it is, I'm not entirely sure, how far it's going, but it, a lot
what is
of it,
standing? What is standing in West Africa? I mean, is he highly respected now? Has he made his mark? What is he remembered for, if anything?
Bob, it's nothing. You can say it's nothing, but I think that the
okay,
beauty, and that is his
I
his
was
attract.
struggling. I was
But
like,
Bob,
what am I gonna
because
say?
that is what makes him attractive,
I
because
thought Adesua
he's
was being ignorant.
he's there in Africa there are a lot of leaders who take strong positions on things,
Yeah.
but
That
but but
that
but
He's
Sumbe has never
but
taken a
if you are
position
so
on anything.
innocuous,
The man
then
has never taken.
you are a safe bet.
he he's not known for much, but yeah, for me, the most interesting weird thing was this idea of Togo possibly wanting to join the Sahel States Association of Sahel States, but he's not known for much. I was struggling really badly. I was like, what am I, what am I going to come up with here? It's there's no moving of the needle. There's no strong stance. There's no even propaganda around him like internationally, like a Traore or something. Like
Yeah.
he just exists and has been for a long time, but he's just
But
there.
if we take it from
he
there, and I
wears he
think
wears some
it
good
goes back
jackets.
to the question Bob raised of the key players around the Congo and this whole African solution thing. One
Yeah,
of the the things which emerged the last few days is this new position that is being taken by the Americans. They are, I think, they are going to close a lot of missions and consulates. 60% of them are in Africa. There was that draft report how they intend to overhaul the Department of State, or what we Africans would call the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And although now they are saying that it's not true, that it's fake news, they were planning to scrap the Africa department, and to create a small desk, something like a road equivalent to a roadside kiosk, where one person sits to look after Africa's
no,
interests.
oh,
It's so, if that is where Trump's thinking, first of all, it's shocking that they could write off a whole continent like that. But then at the same time, they're in the Congo looking for these mineral deals for security. How do you do one when you are basically getting out? And what does that mean from for Africans in future who want to go to the US, who want to engage with the US? What does it mean if these people, if Trump leaves virtually, you know, all posts in Africa except a handful?
that's why you're the one who lives nearer to America. You tell us.
Well, I think, as in, what happens if Trump leaves? We're already seeing signs of. Unfortunately, it's the people who suffer. The UNICEF is talking about the hunger that's spreading. The vast majority of people who are at risk of going hungry this year due to this withdrawal of funding by America. A lot of them are in Africa. But if Trump leaves, I don't really think. I think nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah,
And if Trump leaves, somebody else is going to fill that vacuum. Whether
yeah,
that is going to be the Middle Eastern states, the Arab League countries, or whether it's going to be Russia is what remains to be seen. Like I said before, Russia has spent a lot of money on disinformation campaigns in West Africa. Obviously, we had the Russian paramilitary group, Wagner Group, very prevalent in West Africa before the rebrand and the very weird coup attempt there. But when nature abhors a vacuum, so America leaves, it's not going to be empty in the same way. The only thing is that perhaps the people who are going to try and fill in that vacuum are just not as rich as America. You know, England is broke. Europe doesn't have the money or power that they once did. And they are coming to terms with that very quickly. So I don't know. I think if America leaves, somebody else will come. At the end of the day, because I always say this, you know, lots of times people think if you say something about America, then you're a Russian bot. If you say something against Russia, you're a Western agent. We need to figure out, like, I'm for Africa. I'm an African agent. Let's be real here, right? We know what our interests are, and anyone who comes into the continent is not coming to benefit us, right? They're coming to utilize what we have for their own benefit. So ultimately, in this shifting geopolitical sphere and space, Africa, if we had thinking leaders, they would think about how to benefit from this, you know, push and pull of Donald Trump. It's just that I don't think we have a lot of thinking leaders on the continent.
But
Most of
but
them are.
but Bob, I mean, there are people who say that when you have that vacuum, that there are opportunities. So, for example, um, around peace negotiations, if talk of Congo, talk of Sudan, all these people, there is the argument that when these kind of imperial powers remove themselves, that that they, if they are not in the room, it is just a new opportunity for the pursuit of African solutions or African solutions. There is this argument that even in the tech sector, for example, that that we are likely to see a new imagination in the tech sector, where there is because the tech sector is too dependent on Western venture capital, and that this exit, this Trump exit, allows for them to develop self-sufficient digital economies. So
I
it's
don't know.
is that a pipe dream or
And that's why shoot
That
first.
I'm gonna say that sounds like a pipe dream to me. With only 2% of world venture funding coming to Africa, of course we are reliant on the West, and I think it's also for a reason. If we think about the tech sector specifically, and intellectual property is, I don't think, something that China believes in as a concept. So you know, the West's money would come with less string than Chinese money in those type of sectors. When we're talking about this peace and reconciliation, we're seeing, of course, like Qatar and the Saudis take a very central role when it comes to negotiations. You know, it's like everyone is going there to have these talks, going to that region. But at the same time, even though America is withdrawing, they are also still going to the DRC to discuss minerals in the same way that they were trying to take Ukraine's minerals there, offering the DRC a deal when it comes to minerals. Trump's Africa, what's his name again? Is the Lebanese Nigerian man. It's his Africa guy. Like, if you're a Lebanese Nigerian businessman, I need to I don't know how to explain, but a successful Lebanese Nigerian man knows the game. He knows the game badly. So, but it's just the game that he's playing is different to the normal, you know, the other American game. But he's a successful Lebanese Nigerian businessman.
Businessman.
A businessman, like. So I think we need to understand that.
Charles, Charles, and I want to take on that very point that Adeswa is making. The a type of American who is going to come. America is not exiting. They're going to send the type of Americans that like to do deals. And so you're going to see, guys who are unrestrained by the Foreign Transactions Act or whatever it was called, coming and doing deals on the continent and not having to look over their shoulder about what's going to happen to them at home. Secondly, it will unshackle unscrupulous African politicians from who have been constrained. They will cancel my visa and all of that stuff. They can now do deals knowing that they can do business with Americans, take 10% and not have to worry about all of those things. So they're basically creating a context for a China type of situation. So, and to do that, you leave the foreign policy to be handled by private business people. So don't be surprised if you see an influx, especially in these other countries. Maybe not South Africa, maybe not Egypt, maybe not Morocco, maybe not even Nigeria, but in these other countries, you're going to see American bullies arriving and wanting to have deals. The only problem, which somebody pointed out about Congo, is that they don't have, to take out extractives from Congo, you need to have a military presence. So again, this might help the Congolese situation, that the devolution might work. The guys in the south may decide we'll do a deal with the Americans, take it out through Angola and move on. The bigger question, Adesua, which I think is likely to happen, and this will make you happy, is that this is not the first time that a superpower is exiting Africa. It is always a powerful opportunity, one which we miss. So the British left, the Soviets left, and because most of these politicians and political establishments are really essentially propped up by international powers, they're doing the primary work of international powers. But I think in this age and time where you have a younger population that's more enlightened, you have technology, what's likely to happen is that the politics of Africa is going to change. The leaders you worried about who are incapable of responding to this situation are going to either collapse or be driven out. Even these Traores, they are going to be a temporary measure. They are going to be driven out because
I don't know why you believe that.
I
I
do.
wonder if it's my
Yeah.
youth. I wonder if
No,
it's my
no,
youth because
no,
as long as I've been able to read and write, for example, Togo has had the same president. We've
no,
had two
Adesua.
in Gabon.
Let me
They
let me
don't
tell
go
you what.
anywhere.
Yeah, but what happened in 1989, for instance, once the dual world collapsed, a lot of these autocrats started to collapse. The guy in Ethiopia was driven out. The Kaundas lost elections because they had to liberalize. Benin became so all of those autocratic one-party states had to dismantle the political establishment and respond to the wishes of the people. In Kenya, that's when the struggle for democratization took up in earnest and eventually led 10 years later to the departure of Moi and a whole new beginning. So, yes, survivors like the Togolese dynasty or, Mobutu, it may take time, but even they are forced to adjust unless you have a typically autocratic situation like Equatorial Guinea. But otherwise, you cannot insist on, if a population is changing, that you're going to treat them this way if they're against you. So the population will change because, one, as you said, you will have more hunger because now there's nobody picking up that tab. You're going to have more disease because people are not being treated. You don't have the ability to provide that service. You really think that that will carry on and the political establishment will remain in office oblivious of those social circumstances? I think we might be on the cusp of a revolution ignited by Trump, ironically, because, yes, because he is creating a set of circumstances in the African continent where people will start to ask questions that, by the way, hold on, why am I going to a clinic and there's no medicine? So it causes a lack of confidence. So either the state invests in outright oppression or it has to respond to the pressures. Either way, Adesoa, we're at a point of inflection. A change is inevitable. It will happen. The question is whether it will go the way you want or not, but I am sure there is no way it's going to be business as usual as you see it today.
I think you're right, Bob, because just whenever there has been a major global upheaval,
Yeah,
and I think really, the last one was the end of the Cold War.
yeah,
We went through the phase of the early 2000s after the financial crisis,
Yeah.
and now in this current, tab, turbulence. But you have also mentioned that where states fail, you will then have a crisis. If you can just speak to us, because one of the things US did in a big way is that it supported the health sector. But
Yes.
I've just looked at some data, and it really surprised me that Uganda now is having a problem with the with the mpox, and
Yes.
the World Health Organization says it has the highest number of community transit, transmitted pox cases globally.
Yeah.
But where did that come from? I mean, it's and when
Because
you're in the
Charles,
country, is
because
these kind of threats, do
you
they
see,
manifest? And do you think that this is just one? I mean, I've seen horrible stories of around Africa of HIV programs, and families who were being supported to get antiretroviral drugs from USAID money. These, they are just finished. These people are just sitting there suffering. They have nothing. The American money is not there, and the national governments don't have an answer.
and of course, Charles, they don't have an answer. The reason explanation for me of that mpox thing is so simple. The surveillance, disease surveillance mechanism in Uganda, where they tracked how illnesses were moving and happening in communities, was entirely funded through CDC. And that money was coming through USAID. So if you don't have the Center for Disease Control, if you don't have USAID money, it means the logistics of surveilling these illnesses and how they are moving are non-existent. So the central government just doesn't have the financial ability to do that. And if there is one little telling story that's out of Uganda, which should tell you what's happening to our exchequer, is that the government of Uganda has quickly made a decision to close 20 foreign missions. And they're saying, yes, yes, the government of Uganda has made a decision to close 20 foreign missions. Now, for a small country like us, if you're closing 20 foreign missions, we don't have that many. That's pretty much 50% of your foreign existence. But it also tells you that we're unable to afford the normal functions of government. And the irony is that we're able to find money to finance transactional politics, but we can't find money for disease surveillance. We can't find money for health services. That's why I tell you, Adesua, that if that situation obtains for 2 years, there is no way it's going to be business as usual in the political establishment. They're going to
Thing
pull
I
the
push
plug.
back on this is the Nigerian question then, right? Nigeria has no single ambassador right now because we could not afford it. That was the story. And then there were some political machinations to finally get a list of people that they're going to name as ambassadors. And they've said they are now ready to send that list to the National Assembly, but it hasn't been done yet. A country as big as Nigeria has not had a single ambassador,
Wait, wait, wait,
right?
wait. What are you saying? That that Nigeria presently is not
Has,
represented by a full ambassador anywhere in the world?
yes, for 2 years.
Well, the president is over 82. The Pope, the Pope
I'm
died in
telling,
88. By the way, how old
okay,
is how old is your president?
well, he's now alleging that he's just turned 73, I think. So I don't even, that's, he's having fun with us. But
But
yes, Nigeria hasn't had a single. But what I'm saying is that I understand why you want to believe, And
No,
I
it's
would hope
no,
for somewhere else that it's
no,
not business as
Adesua. No,
usual.
Adesua. It's not that I hope to believe. It's not even a belief. I am just looking back, as Charles said.
Mm.
Every time there has been a major global event that reshapes the global establishment, those consequences are felt in Africa. And if you want, I am happy to go back to 1945. You see, in 1945, you have the end of the World War and a bankrupted colonial empire that has to go.
And that
And
led
so,
to our independence movements by
exactly.
1960, 1959, early 1960s.
So the 60s and 70s are that. Another major global event was the collapse of the military regime in Portugal. And that
Yes.
led to changes in Southern Africa.
Yes.
So America has been the political bulwark of a certain order in the world. And we call it the Washington Consensus, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of African leaders have invested a lot of money in being acceptable to that world order.
Hmm.
Once that world order is dismantled, these people are at sea. They no longer understand or know which client to either take on or serve. Now, I am just throwing in an added problem. It is coming at a time when communication is at its easiest, when it is so easy for us to sit here like we're doing to have a podcast and discuss the African problems without inhibition. What that means is that the population, especially the younger people, don't have to settle for the kinds of things we are settling for as the older generation. But that means that they will say, wait a minute, if my father is dying because he can't access medical attention, if we cannot move, like I can tell you, three major highways in Uganda have been abandoned by the contractors because contractors have not been paid to the tune of 1 trillion shillings. If you divide that by 3,650, you will know the amount in dollars. They haven't been paid. Three major arteries have been abandoned by contractors. We're closing embassies. That tells you that the state can only finance politics. It can't finance anything else. When you
Mm.
do that, it means that people are likely to respond politically and they're likely to take away your your legitimacy. So
Is
those
it me
things
that's frozen or is
we've
it
seen
Bob?
enough history to believe that those it will lead to some kind of change in whatever nature it takes. We don't know, but we saw independence, we saw military coups, we saw multi-party politics come on the continent, we saw the emergence of civil society and more outspoken sections of society. We had greater participation, we saw regularity of elections. So all those things for me lead to the fact that yes, the change will happen. Yeah.
So
Ah,
basically, as that's what I was saying, I think this calls for us to withdraw and pray to our messiahs,
yeah, 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 yeah,
and,
yeah.
which brings us to our parting shots.
True, true.
Bob, what have
Yeah.
you been thinking in the week?
So two
What are you
things.
living
Two things. One is I'll start on one which is very depressing. There's a man called Moses Ali. He's the second deputy prime minister in Uganda. I mean, this guy is well over 86. It's probably 88, the age at which the Pope died. This guy has been ravaged by Parkinson's disease. He was a minister in 1978 when I was in primary five. Charles, he's still a minister today. My son is going to university, my last son. And this guy says he wants to stand for parliament. It just shows you how completely out of touch and selfish a lot of the political actors are. And somebody's going to support him and probably rig the election to make sure that he comes through. Why would a guy like that be making significant political decisions? He's clearly impaired. The guy has Parkinson's. He's 86. He's done. So for me, I think that is symptomatic of the political leadership on the African continent. That guy is the same age as the Nigerian president. He's the same age as Nguema in Equatorial Guinea. He's the same age as Mnangagwa in Zimbabwe. You see, these guys, they need to go home, man. they need to go and rest, but also they need to leave us and spare us from the consequences of their circumstances. So that's for me the bad, the depressing side. The more hopeful one, which I wanted to end on, is the PwC has released its East Africa report. And two things struck me there. One, the business leaders are more optimistic about the economic circumstances of Eastern Africa. They're actually quite optimistic. It's shocking, but they are very optimistic. They have lined up the risks, macroeconomic instability, and all those things. But the reason they're very optimistic is now all of them are talking about strategic reinvention and innovation and building generative AI into their businesses and preparing for the business of the future. So I really think that the private sector, the business community of Eastern Africa, need to be listened to a bit more by our political leadership and see where the region could go. So I felt that that was an optimistic one for me. Yeah.
I'll buy that. I'll buy that. That that that's a good note. Guess what is happening on the Atlantic Coast? What are your parting shots? What are your parting shots?
Oh, my parting shots. First, I'm not going to make it African this week. I am going to go on to America because sometimes I think some types of incompetence that we're seeing from America is fascinating. Christy Nome, who is the Homeland Security Secretary, had her bag stolen with her security badge and $3,000. Her handbag was stolen in a restaurant. She also lost her passport and keys.
$3,000. What was she doing with $3,000 in cash in America?
Good question. Fantastic question. But I thought, after my parting shot was the Nigeria's national security advisor. When I was in New York, I got an alert that his car was stolen. Nuhu Ribadu's car was stolen when he went to the mosque for prayer. So I was like, oh, wow, the NSA's car is getting stolen. But America decided to one up Nuhu Ribadu. And Christy Nome lost her security badge. The Homeland Security Secretary lost her security badge and her passport and keys. And I was like, you know what?
And $3,000 in cash.
And $3,000 in cash. Fantastic job the Trump team is doing, especially after the signal. What came out with the signal chat? So apparently now CNN has revealed that there was another signal chat which
Yeah.
included Hexet's wife.
Again.
So
Some of these guys in America in the Trump administration, they wouldn't be given a job in a district government in some parts of Africa, but there you are. But my parting shot is this: the Global Terrorism Index. Just came out. It is done by the Australia's Institute for Economics and Peace, and it's of the 10 countries that are most affected by terrorism in the world. 6 of them are in Africa: Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon. Burkina Faso. But if you look at in Burkina Faso, for example, the number of attacks dropped by 17%, terrorism attacks. However, the number of deaths jumped by 68%. That is, even though there are fewer attacks, they are much more violent, and they are killing more people. And Bob, and that's why the thing about this statistic is that uh like if we go back to 2012, 2014, the at that time in Africa, you were more likely to die from a car accident than from a bomb or a bullet. So it just shocks me what has happened to us in just 13 years, how much we have lost. But there is, like you say, always an opportunity for recovery. Thank you very much for listening to us in this episode of The Bad Native. We appreciate your audience and love it very much if you could hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Please also follow us on our various social media handles. See you next week.